There are different ways to conceptualize vulnerability in general and vulnerability to climate change in particular. We distinguish two approaches to studying vulnerability. The first approach focuses on outcomes. This can be considered the traditional approach to vulnerability. Another approach, which we are developing, focuses on context. If we adopt the outcomes-focused approach to vulnerability, we look at the risks associated with climate change, such as the risk of drought affecting various elements, the increasing risk of fire, the appearance or disappearance of new plants, heat waves, floods, etc. The core idea is to examine units or elements within the landscape and first ask how these entities are exposed to risk. Then the question arises, are they sensitive to the risks? One can be exposed to climate change without being sensitive to it. For example, one might be exposed to the invasion of a plant in the garden but not be bothered by it. Finally, what is their adaptive capacity? If they are exposed and sensitive, they may still be able to adapt to cope with the risk. For example, a group of users in a landscape needs water, such as the farmers whose land is drying up due to climate change. Another example is the Hérault watershed downstream of the Salagout Dam, where water is needed, as in the city of Agde, which you see here, which needs water to support tourist activities in summer. Another example concerns birds that live in reed beds. They need water for the reeds to thrive and provide their habitat. These units are exposed and sensitive. Adaptations might include, for example, pumping water from the lake or more distant water bodies so that a group of users can benefit from it and adapt to their climate change problem. Alternatively, another solution could be for the user group to change their practices, doing things differently. Or we could mix these different adaptations. This is an approach that focuses on impacts. There is another approach to vulnerability that focuses on context. It involves examining how the vulnerability of groups is constructed from within complex relationships to and within the landscape. There are different ways of inhabiting the landscape based on the history of the groups engaging with it. For example, there are differences in vulnerability between those who have inherited their farms from their parents, rooted in a long local cultural history, and those who have arrived more recently and introduced new practices. For the former, it is precisely through their long-term engagement with the landscape that it may have acquired a very specific, perhaps identity-giving meaning, making it vulnerable in particular ways. Another example concerns fishermen, who exhibit different vulnerabilities depending on their practices. For instance, carp fishermen and those fishing for other species are not vulnerable in the same way because their relationships to the landscape and the fish differ. Vulnerability that focuses on context is constructed through performative relationships within assemblages. These are the two approaches to vulnerability. Our approach, which focuses on affective relationships, is a way of understanding vulnerability in relation to context. We are more aligned with this second approach, although we take the first approach into account. This comprehensive study of vulnerability aims to serve different purposes and user groups that are part of complex assemblages shaping the landscape.